Welcome to Aviafly, the YouTube history channel with aircraft, airlines, and aviation podcasts. German, Greek, Italian, and French terms appear in this podcast. We can't pronounce these terms correctly. It remains with an English pronunciation, which the listener may forgive us and hopefully can take with great humor. Today's topic: From the Beginnings of Aviation, Part 1. From the sky car to the steam engine. The desire to take to the skies and fly like birds reaches far back into the prehistory of aviation. Human ingenuity had to travel a long way from the wings of Icarus to the achievements of Otto Lilienthal and the Montgolfier and Wright brothers. Winged gods were worshipped in ancient Egypt. Assyrian artwork shows bulls with wings. In the Far East, divine avian beings in flying triumphal chariots, some with paddle wheels, were ensconced in the sky. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, was equipped with wings, and the winged steed Pegasus was supposed to inspire poets. Good and evil spirits were also believed to have the ability to fly. In the Germanic heroic sagas of the Edda, there is talk of the feathered garment with which the wearer moves through the sea of air. According to legend, Daedalus and Icarus were the first people to succeed in flight. Daedalus, engineer of the legendary King Minos in Crete, had fallen from grace. To escape, he built wings for himself and his son. Icarus disregarded his father's warning to get too close to the sun. So the wax that held the feathers together melted. Icarus plunged into the sea, while Daedalus is said to have landed safely in Sicily. The legend possibly goes back to an early attempt to fly. Alexander the Great harnessed winged dragons for his supposed flight, which he is said to have motivated to soar by baiting them with pieces of meat out of their reach above their greedy heads. In Persia, Shah Kaiqawaz is said to have attempted to travel through the air similarly. Instead of griffins, he made use of eagles that were offered a lure. The distinguished English aviation historian Charles Harvard Gibbs Smith pointed out the three fundamental contributions of the ancient Chinese to the field of aeronautics and propulsion. First, the invention of the kite around 1000 BC. Second, the gunpowder in the 9th, and third, the rocket in the 11th century of our era. He explained, "The kite was both the archetype of the airplane wing and the world's first aerial vehicle. Because human-carrying kites were certainly in use in China within a few centuries of the invention of the kite, their first application resulted in the field of military observation. All three inventions found their way along the trade routes of the ancient world and appeared in Europe during the Middle Ages." Windsock-like kites were in use by the Romans and other peoples as field signs, as shown, for example, by Trajan's column in Rome. They had an animal head with an open mouth, in which a firebrand was later placed. In the Battle of Liegnitz in 1241, Mongols frightened their enemies so much that they turned to flight in the face of such infernal magic. In an English manuscript from 1326, a miniature above a besieged city shows a sack-like dragon with wings from which a bomb hangs. War kites were used more frequently. Conrad Kaiser von Eichstätt reported in the early 15th century of a flying kite, into whose mouth one had to put a petroleum lamp or a rocket, the stinging flame of which should shoot out to the tail. In a Frankfurt book from 1540, a warm air kite, an early ancestor of hot air balloons, is depicted being raised on a winch cable. Among the treasures of the Munich State Library is a book written around 1420 by the Italian engineer Johannes de Fontana, which shows a rocket-powered model of a bird with outstretched wings and ejection from its tail. Although the origin of the propeller remains shrouded in obscurity, research has uncovered some amazing things. Windmills, which were widely used in their typical form in the 13th century, basically represent a passive air screw. However, the use of the propeller derived from the windmill as an active means of propulsion was already known in the Middle Ages in the form of a children's toy that anticipated the principle of the helicopter. The earliest known illustration of the popular helicopter toy is found in a Flemish manuscript from around 1325. The toy is propelled by pulling a string wound on a spindle on the rotor shaft. The horizontally mounted rotor consists of 4 blades whose shape is derived from the sails of the windmill. In this toy, Charles H. Gibbs Smith sees the direct ancestor of every helicopter that flies today. The Italian universal genius Leonardo da Vinci was obsessed with the idea of flight. With great scientific zeal, he investigated flight problems based on the studies of others and developed possible solutions with great constructive skill. Based on observations of the flight of birds and bats, he sought a solution above all in wing-beating flying machines. Leonardo da Vinci assumed that rapid strokes would compress the air under the wing so that the machine could fly on this cushion of air. Although the Italian made some drawings of gliders, he was fixated on the idea of the swing-wing aircraft. Leonardo da Vinci failed not least because of his view that human muscle power was sufficient to propel a flying machine with wings flapping up and back. Only in recent years, with the ultralight construction materials available today, has muscle-powered flight succeeded, using an airplane with rigid wings whose propeller is driven by pedals similar to those on a bicycle. On June 12, 1979, American cyclist Brian Allen achieved the first muscle-powered flight across the English Channel. The Gossamer Albatross aircraft, designed by Californian scientist Dr. Paul D. McCready, weighed just 25 kilograms with a wingspan of 29 meters. It took the record-breaking pilot 3 hours and 49 minutes to cover the 40-kilometer distance. Leonardo da Vinci envisaged a wingspan of up to 18 meters for the swing-wing aircraft he designed. Based on the realization that man has more strength in his legs than in his arms, his designs envisioned the use of muscular strength in both the legs and the arms. Some sketches show the flying man standing up in the torso, others lying down. Head movements were to move the elevator. The Italian genius even developed a retractable landing gear. In the construction of his wings, Leonardo da Vinci took the bat as a model because its wings are technically easier to imitate than surfaces made of feathers. To test his designs, the Renaissance artist, scientist and technician devised a device resembling a scale. He recommended making flight tests over the water so that you do not hurt yourself in case of a possible crash. The master himself did not undertake any flight experiments, as far as is known. But he recognized air resistance, saw in streamlining the body of least resistance, and investigated the course of flow by experiments in flowing water as well as along a sunbeam in a darkened room, concentrating on the swirls of dust grains. Among the genius's discoveries were the center of gravity and the center of drag as factors determining stability in flight. Leonardo da Vinci invented the parachute in the form of a pyramid-shaped tent and drew a helical lifting screw, as shown in a rough sketch in his writings. His parachute was to be 12 cubits wide and 12 cubits high. Leonardo da Vinci's work, however, had no direct influence on the course of the history of aviation, as his writings and drawings lay unnoticed in an archive for centuries. Experiments with swings and muscle power. Time and again, daredevil men and eccentric experimenters threw themselves from towers and platforms into the depths with artificial swings. Where they did not break their bones or spine, they were ridiculed and scorned by their contemporaries or even persecuted by the authorities, as the church saw the devil's work in the attempt to ascend to heaven. Around the year 880, an Arab named Abu al-Qasim ben Furnaz is said to have flown in Cordoba with wings made of bird feathers, as did the English Benedictine monk Oliver of Malmesbury in the early 11th century. The first attempted flight in Germany is attributed to a Nuremberg cantor named Senecio in 1496. It ended miserably with a broken arm. The air belongs to the birds. Everyone should leave it at that, was one comment. For his gliding attempt, the cantor is said to have tied wooden wings to his shoulders. The Nuremberg mechanic Hans Hoch, who lived from 1595 to 1670, is also reported to have attempted flight. In the 17th century, the Italian naturalist Giovanni Alfonso Borelli concluded in his paper on the motion of animals, "If one asks the question whether a man can fly by his power, it is clear that the power of the pectoral muscles in man is much too small, for in birds the weight of the muscles serving for flapping is not less than 1/6 of the whole weight of the body, in man not even the 100th part." But those obsessed with the idea of muscle-powered flight did not give up. Based on the legend of Daedalus, the German scholar George Pask built himself wings in 1695, with which he landed rather roughly. Others did not fare any better. In an attempt to fly, a man named Bernoin broke his neck and legs in Frankfurt in 1763. The same fate befell a young Frenchman a few years later, who offered to fly down from St. Paul's Cathedral in London with leather-covered bar wings. Constantly flapping his wings, he suffered fatal injuries on his second attempt. The Dutchman Adrian Bartjan was more careful. He used eagle feathers to construct his wings and had himself secured by a rope during the first jump, but then abandoned it and crashed headfirst. Jean-Pierre Blanchard announced in Paris in 1781 that he would fly through the air like a raven on a scaffold with 4 flapping wings, but he had to abandon the project. Blanchard later achieved fame as a balloonist. In 1784, Carl Friedrich Meerwein, a master builder from the German city Baden who lived between 1737 and 1810, reported on the art of flying in the manner of birds. He believed that humans needed a wing area of about 12 square meters to fly. He had reached this conclusion by making comparisons with various species of birds. In his flying apparatus, the pilot was supposed to use a long rod to raise and lower the 2 halves of a shield-shaped wing connected by hinges in a lying position. Nothing more than a crash resulted. A watchmaker and the tailor of Ulm. In 1807, Jacob Degen, a watchmaker from Switzerland, presented in Vienna a remarkable flying machine made of reeds, bamboo, silk threads, and parchment paper, which weighed only 14 kilograms with a wingspan of 6.70 meters and a wing area of 12 square meters. The 2 wings were each equipped with 3,500 valve flaps that closed when the wing fell and opened when the wing was raised, allowing air to flow through semi-unhindered. Because the Swiss's physical strength was not sufficient to ascend, he used a counterweight guided by rollers on the ceiling in the Vienna Riding School in 1808. After all, Degen achieved a lift of almost 44 kilograms by rapidly flapping the wings of his Schwingenflieger up and down. With 25 wing strokes, he gained an altitude of 15 meters within 30 seconds. Of course, this did not mean that he had succeeded in the art of aerial swimming. But the watchmaker had not promised this either. In 1808, relieved of his debts by a grant from the imperial family, Jacob Degen combined his flapping wing apparatus with a small hydrogen balloon, which was supposed to give his muscle-powered machine the lift it lacked and make the balloon steerable. In this way, however, the experimenter achieved only small targeted changes in his position, and only when there was no wind. To make money, the inventor went among showmen who lured the public with false announcements. The anger of disappointed spectators was so great that they smashed his apparatus in Paris in 1812, and Degen only escaped with his skin intact thanks to the protection of the police. A wave of ridicule poured down on the modest inventor, who had previously had to endure repeated acts of sabotage on his precision-made apparatus in Paris. Years later, Jacob Degen, who had been preoccupied with the idea of flight for a long time, constructed a helicopter model combined with a parachute, which was powered by clockwork and capable of flight. When the engine ran out, a small parachute opened automatically and the model sank to earth. The news of Degen's flying machine, along with other imitators, did not let the German Albrecht Ludwig Berblinger, known as the Schneider von Ulm, rest. However, this man, who lived from 1770 to 1829, had not understood the design principle and dispensed with the flapping mechanism on the assumption that the strength of his arms was sufficient. When Berblinger tried to cross the Danube from a scaffold on the Adler Bastii in Ulm on May 31, 1811, he was unable to hold the wings. They folded upwards. Crying out in horror, the tailor plunged vertically into the river. Fishermen pulled him out of the water amid the mocking and jeering laughter of the numerous spectators. The Viennese newspaper hoax. The prehistory of flying is full of oddities. Among them is the flying ship, for which the Brazilian Lourenço de Gusmão, who lived from 1686 to 1724, obtained a privilege from the King of Portugal in 1709. The peculiar passarola, which means large bird, has survived in an engraving depicting a nonsensical structure. The drawing reached the Viennese court and became by a journalistic turtle prank a great sensation for the 18th century, which attracted widespread attention. The newspaper writer knew how to describe the flight of the passarola from Lisbon to Vienna in an exciting way in a flyer, which was sold like hotcakes but had the disadvantage that this flight had never taken place. The passarola probably never got off the ground. Documents report that de Gusmão later made small hollow bodies filled with heated air rise. These model attempts of a primitive hot air balloon earned the Brazilian the nickname the Aviator. But there is no solid evidence for the correctness of this claim. In 1749, Glasgow professor Alexander Wilson used the lift of several paper kites stretched one behind the other to carry a thermometer into the clouds that were drifting at an altitude of 900 meters. To study the electrical charge of the atmosphere, Benjamin Franklin also used kites. During these experiments, he was nearly killed by an electric shock in 1752. In 1768, the French mathematician A.J.P. Paucton proposed a human-powered helicopter with two helical rotors, one providing the necessary lift and the other the propulsion. Although the model was never built, his paper is considered the first proposal of horizontal propulsion by a propeller. Russian scientists credit Michael V. Lomonosov with building a model helicopter with two counter-rotating rotors in 1754. With the help of clockwork, the rotorcraft is also said to have flown successfully. The sky carriage of Melchior Bauer. Even though the project of Melchior Bauer, born in 1733 in the Leipzig district, was not realized due to lack of support, his name ranks among the pioneers of flight. The ideas of the farmer's son were far ahead of his time. The aircraft manuscript, discovered in 1921 in a branch of today's Weimar State Archives, bears witness to the high level of technical understanding of the self-taught engineer. For his skycar, Melchior Bauer did not envisage wings moved by muscle power, but a rigid wing, which he called the sky. It was to develop so much lift that the four-wheeled construction would lift off the ground when rolling down a high mountain as soon as the required speed was reached. Bauer arranged vertical guide surfaces and small wings which the pilot was to swing up and down. This was the type of wind engine the inventor had devised for locomotion in the air. Melchior Bauer was thus the first to combine a kite design with the engine principle. The inventor did not expect any financial support in his home country, which had been ravaged by the 7 Years' War. Therefore, Melchior Bauer traveled to London in 1763, where the court official responsible for applications refused to submit such foolishness to King George III. Disappointed, but not discouraged, the 30-year-old returned to Germany to put his thoughts on paper and have them presented to King Frederick II at the Prussian court in Potsdam. His Royal Majesty did not believe the young man. "The heated fever has spoiled your head," was the comment of a privy councillor. The modest inventor in Potsdam had to be told that wiser and more studied minds had dealt with the problem of flight and had come up with nothing. The flight manuscript is the application, complete with drawings, that Melchior Bauer finally submitted to his sovereign, the Count of Roscres. Without success. Discouraged, the inventor left his home. His trail is lost in obscurity. Melchior Bauer, who is named in German aviation history as the most ingenious aircraft designer before Otto Lilienthal, had been too far ahead of his time. The first aerodynamicist, Sir George Cayley. "Aeronautics will form an exceedingly excellent feature in the progress of civilization," wrote Sir George Cayley in 1809 in almost visionary terms. The English nobleman, who lived from 1773 to 1857, is to the French aviation historian Charles Dolphus the true inventor of the airplane and one of the most efficient geniuses in the history of aviation. At the age of 33, independently of others before him, he made a helicopter model that led directly to the entire later development of rotorcraft. He arrived at a mature conception of the modern airplane that many others built. On display at the Science Museum in London is a silver disc of Cayley's, dated 1799, on which is carved a diagram of the basic forces involved in flight, lift, drag, and propulsion. After Cayley realized the real aerodynamic importance of the kite, he built a 1.5-meter glider. According to Charles H. Gibbs Smith, it was the first suitable and successful airplane in history with a cruciform tailplane and rudder. 5 years later, a glider with 18.6 square meters wings not only completed successful test flights, but one day even carried a boy a few meters. One of his triplane gliders carried its reluctant coachman, John Appleby, over a narrow valley near Brompton in 1853 and, according to eyewitness accounts, probably landed somewhat ungently. The event is now considered the first glider flight in history. In the previous year, Sir George Cayley had already published in a magazine design drawings of a glider with inherent stability about the longitudinal and transverse axes, together with a description of how it was to be flown. The inventor envisaged using it from a balloon. But nobody took any notice of the publication. Even the Aeronautical Society in London, founded in 1866, did not concern itself with it. In 1843, Cayley designed a helicopter with 4 8-bladed rotors for lift and 2 propellers for forwarding motion. Like the gliders, the design featured a boat-shaped fuselage that irritates us today. Such insignificant details, however, should not obscure the fact that Cayley is the founder of the science of aerodynamics. Among the Englishman's many fundamental discoveries was the finding that negative pressure develops on the upper surface of a wing in flight, causing lift. Cayley was concerned with streamlining and worked on the hot air engine as well as the gunpowder engine. Steam flying machines. With the findings of Cayley and others, however, the idea of swing-wing flight was far from buried. In the 19th century, the realization gradually gained ground that prime movers would have to be used to move the wings. As early as 1820, Freiherr von Drais, the inventor of the two-wheeler, wanted to use a steam engine in a swing-arm aircraft. At the same time, in the United States, Martin Mason equipped a swing-wing aircraft with a steam engine, without ever being able to make it fly. Quite original is the idea published in 1847 by a German named Heinrich Bucher for a paddle-wheel airplane. Similar to a paddle steamer, 2 pairs of huge sail wheels were to be mounted on either side of the fuselage with the powerful engine. Joseph M. Kaufmann built a steam flying machine in 1867 that caused a great sensation at London's Crystal Palace. The behemoth was a 4-decker. In front of these wings was a pair of flapping wings, which propelled the machine at a frequency of 150 to 200 strokes per minute and were intended to give it a speed of 12 miles an hour. In the memoirs of Werner von Siemens, published in 1892, it says, "It is undoubted that we will be able to produce flying machines on the model of flying animals, once the basic conditions for this have been fulfilled, which consist in having machines that are as light and strong as the locomotor muscles of flying animals and do not require much greater consumption of fuel than these. Once such the machine has been invented, any skilled mechanic can build a flying machine. But inventors always start at the wrong end and invent flying machines without having the power to move them." That was the Aviafly podcast. If you liked it, we would be very happy about your like and your subscription, because only this way we can continue to offer you exciting podcasts from the world of aviation. See you soon!